When Germany invaded Poland, it triggered World War II. When Trump invaded Venezuela, it shattered the international systems of justice and the diplomatic relationships that had lasted since 1945. Now, I'm going to qualify that. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, and it's not like there was a complete, total military invasion. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that there is a fundamental tectonic shift in the whole way that the international relations run. The whole period of sustained relative peace since 1945, there has been a world order that what this has done has shattered that. And here's what you've got to understand about what's going on. This has been meticulously planned. This has been flawlessly executed. But not just this military campaign, the whole media release, the timing of this, it's very strategic and tactical all at once. And they've been very clever about this. And once you see it, you'll understand the level of sophistication involved to pull this off. To really get a clear picture of what's going on, you've got to think about who's benefiting, why they're doing it, and what their objectives are. Okay? In my opinion, I think what's really driving this is not money like the capitalist dollar. I think this is really all about power. It's about absolute power. That's the main objective. And it is about the incremental death of 1,000 cuts of democracy. That's what the Venezuelan move is. It's a key strategic move, highly nuanced, highly choreographed, and intricately designed. So here's trap number one. Targeting somebody like Maduro, who is clearly a dictator, not a good guy, who has a terrible reputation and who is immensely unpopular with the Venezuelan people. I mean, I've seen some figures out there claiming that anywhere from 15 to 20% of the Venezuelan population had to flee from Venezuela for fear of being rounded up and either tortured or worse. And that Maduro was, well, he's part of a cartel. So is his deputy his deputy at the time, who's now the acting president. Okay, let's look at one of their tricks. So if you oppose what they did or are critical, how do they respond? They say, oh, you're in favor of a brutal dictator, a narco-terrorist, a terrible man, and you're supporting him because you're being critical of what Trump did, okay? And then the next thing is, oh, you are against the troops. You're not supporting the troops, so you're disloyal and you're not patriotic. And then they'll say things like, you're weak on security. Or they'll say, see, to the Venezuelan people, see, these people wanted Maduro to stay in power. That's how they'll spin it. Rather than something a little more nuanced. But here's the flip side of that. So if you support what they did, you're tacitly supporting the dismantling of the whole international system of justice. And by virtue, you're also endorsing that the president suddenly has powers to declare wars or carry out military operations without the consent of Congress. And then it also validates the idea that Putin was putting around about these regional superpowers basically ruling supreme in their areas. And so this clever trap works because objectively Maduro was a terrible person. He'd brutalized his people. He's a member of a drug cartel. He was actively involved in the drug trade. And it's widely believed that he stole the election. So he's really not a good guy. How it's being spun is it's a police action. That's the view. The MAGA machine is trying to convince you that that's what's going on, that it was a lawful action and they went in and they grabbed this terrible narco-terrorist who was also an evil dictator who had brutalized the people of Venezuela, and therefore he deserved to be arrested and tried as any normal criminal would, and that this is great because it's the United States is standing up for the people of Venezuela and freeing them from the evil dictator. That's the narrative. If only it were that simple. And that's why it's very clever the way they've played this. They've picked a bad hombre. If you are even remotely critical of what went on, they immediately pivot to, oh, you're supporting the narco-terrorist. You are for the drug trafficking. You are for the brutality of an evil dictator, which is nonsense. Because I can say right off the bat, not in support of dictatorship, not in support of the drug trade that was going on, not in support of the cartel activity that was there, not in support of the displacing of, 15 to 20% of the population. It might be more or less. I don't have the exact figures, and I don't know anybody really can tell you the exact figures, but a lot of people. And we do know that people were brutalized, totally unacceptable. So anybody that's trying to come at me, or most people that are like me, who are trying to analyze what's happened and then break it down into pieces and then shine a light on everything that's happening. So don't come at me saying, oh, you're supporting Maduro. No, definitely not. Was Maduro a bad guy? Yeah, he's a bad guy. And so here's the message I want to get through to address that little can of worms, which is you can be totally against an evil dictator, a narco-terrorist, and all the bad things they're saying about Maduro. You can be in total agreement with that, but at the same time, it's like you can walk and chew gum. You can do two things, can sit in your mind that aren't contradictory, that are logical, but you can also have a problem with what they did and how they did it because they broke international laws. And what I want to do is to really focus on the dramatic impact that it's having globally. Okay, so check this slide out. But here's what I'm going to argue. I'm arguing that we now have had a fundamental shift. Basically, it's about the before and after. Before January the 3rd and after it. They're two different worlds now. I think we've seen such a major tectonic shift. It was already happening. When the tariffs went through, we saw the United States foreign policy started to move. There was a tectonic shift with the tariffs. That really shook the world up. And in particular, when the US foreign policy aligned more with Russia and turned its back on Europe, it really put into the motion some fundamental changes, which meant that there's a whole lot of realignment that's been going on. This Venezuela thing, this is the last straw. This is like Germany attacking Poland. This is going to destroy alliances. It's going to permanently change the whole structure of the way that the world had worked post-1945. I mean, what brought everybody together was the terrible mess left after World War II. Millions and millions and millions of people lost their lives. Millions suffered terrible suffering and misery. And whole great cities were reduced to ash and rubble. Very sobering. And to the credit of the people that ran the foreign policy for the United States, they actually did the right thing and helped the different countries to rebuild. So they didn't have a World War I cycling into World War II scenario where you punish the loser so badly that you actually engineer the roots of what became the Germany of the 1930s and 1940s up until 45. Things like the Marshall Plan. But there's a whole cohesion. Have there been little side wars here and there? Yes. But has there been like a global major theatre of war going on? They talk, you've probably heard the terms Cold War. So there's certainly different ploys going on. And okay, the Cuban Missile Crisis was pretty scary. I mean, it could have been the end of the road. It was that bad. But what we have here is on par with that. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's actually worse. Okay, so before and after, how the world sees the United States. There's several levels to this because we're talking about the way people perceive the different governments and those official attitudes. But then look at the average person around the world. Imagine what they're thinking and what they're feeling. The United States has basically gone from being the protector to being a predator or an aggressor state. So let's have a look at it. So the first section, and I'm going to keep flashing the slide up so you guys can see it. You can stop and you can have a look at it. I'll just flash it up occasionally, so if you want to, just for convenience, so you can stop the video and actually read and have a look at it for those that are looking visually. So 1945 to 2025, the US was the protector. So enforcing the well-established rules-based order, defended smaller nations, maintained relationships, and basically retained the commitments. And then there was the key concept of respecting that each state is a sovereign state and that you're not supposed to go and plunder them. There was a rejection of the idea of might is right. That's what came out of 1945, that the bigger states had to look after the smaller ones and ensure that the world wasn't full of constantly being in a state of wars. And what I find astounding is when you really think about it, Donald Trump is out there saying, oh, no, I'm against wars. I'm not a war president. Well, why do you rename the Department of Defense to the Department of War and the warrior culture and all this sort of stuff? And look at the actions that are going on. Real engagements that echo a kind of imperialistic tone. And so let's go through this. So predictable. Treaties mattered. Countries tended to adhere to the treaties to some extent. I mean, there's always going to be some negotiation and transactional behaviour that goes on, but there was a stability there. The congressional checks on power were applied. The international law was followed. Look at the wholesale, everything's for sale kind of attitude, and we're going to go through into this. Trustworthy ally. So we're on the before and after. Before, from 1945 to 2025. Trustworthy ally. NATO Article 5. Trade agreements were on it. Defence commitments and diplomatic solutions. The first port of call to try and solve issues and problems or disputes or whatever was to try and mediate, was to find a diplomatic solution. You didn't just instantly reach for your six-shooter and do a Wild West where you just pull your gun out. And, I'm speaking metaphorically. But with Venezuela, that's a military action. I mean, they're trying to pass it off as being a policing action or law enforcement. But when you've got the Delta forces and the CIA involved, this is a military operation. I've got to keep on pulling this back to reality. Yeah, Maduro was a bad guy. He was a dictator. So this is not saying, oh, it's bad that you took out a dictator. No, well, that's a good thing. And I think most of the Venezuelans are happy about that initially. But his deputy is now the acting president and is also a member of the cartel. So the forces maintaining that dictatorship are still in place. Okay, so let's look at post 3rd of January, which will go down in history, I think, as Destroy the World Order Day or Destroy the International Order Day or something like that. And so 2026 becomes the era of the predator. This sets a precedent that the US can invade sovereign nations on any pretext. We're now seeing the US actually threatening allies openly, not even through some channels or anything, but actually right out there so everybody can see it with press releases. And then we're looking at the extracting the resources. Now, okay, some people are saying it's going to take some time to tool up to be able to utilize that oil out of Venezuela at scale. Sure. And you'd need to build the right infrastructure to do that. But part of the issue here is that one of the key things, though, you can do if you can control the flow of the oil is you can manipulate the prices. It's like supply and demand. The whole futures market for oil is going to be very different now. And so what you've got to understand is China holds the lion's share of the rare earth mineral supply, which are vital to all sorts of high-tech weaponry, to high-tech medical gear, to high-tech AI and other information technology systems, which rely on some of these specific rare earth minerals to be able to function, and are critical in terms of the longevity of trying to advance technically. Whoever has those supplies and can control them the most is going to have a distinct economic advantage and potentially a technical advantage. So this is not trivial, and there are significant amounts of rare earth minerals that are in Venezuela. So the potential here is that resource-rich countries can become a target. What it boils down to is ready-made markets ready to be exploited by Trump's allies. And then we're getting comments from Donald Trump, which I think is actually real, which is, we're going to run the country. They're probably going to do it at an arm's length. But the thing is that there's always the existential threat that special forces can come in, CIA, Delta Force, whatever. And the amount of aircraft that were involved in this operation was significant. This was a major operation and long in the making. This was intricately planned and highly choreographed to do that and have no casualties. And it takes incredible precision to be able to carry off that kind of surgical mission and execute it. And I have to agree with the MAGA talking point. You have to agree with it. It was flawless. They executed it flawlessly. But it's a really dangerous thing when they're saying, oh, let's celebrate. Isn't it so wonderful? Yeah, it's great that your troops go in and execute properly and you don't have casualties. Great stuff. And yes, that you get rid of a dictator. Yeah, okay. I think most people are going to say, yeah, I don't think we have a problem with that. What we have a problem is breaking the international system and coming across and really establishing yourself as, instead of being the protector, of being the predator. So anyway, going through the slide, 2026, predator. We're going to run the country. So let's recap that. So this opens the door to invading sovereign nations. There is the open threat to allies. There is the whole notion of being like a pirate ship and exploiting other countries' resources at scale and under duress, kind of like a mafia deal, which is pay me. And then things like, we're going to run the country. So this means what? The US is going to lean on with the Dunroe doctrine, all of what? This part of the hemisphere, all around where the United States is now all going to become vassal states of the United States. Is that what we're talking about? It sure sounds like it, doesn't it? The Trump administration is now seen to be a predator administration. It's seen to be chaotic. Now, I think this is orchestrated, but the chaos is more that they create chaos to keep other people off balance. I actually think that it's a feature, not a bug. I think the whole way they work is deliberately to be chaotic, is to keep everybody off center. And, some people are saying, oh, Rubio was sort of shocked that he's suddenly going to do this or that, or that Donald Trump said these different things. I think I don't know that it's necessarily totally choreographed and prefigured, although it could be, and some of it probably is. But a lot of it is that the major structural changes just inexorably keep on happening. They're still putting, like Project 2025 and now Project 2026 are being systematically implemented. So we've purged the DOJ, we've purged, but they've purged the Department of Justice, they've purged the FBI. So they're now captured. They're MAGA. It's the MAGA Department of Justice. It's the MAGA FBI now, which is biased. It's not about applying the law. It's about whatever's good for the king, whatever's good for His Majesty Donald Trump. That's what it is. And so this goes to my other argument, which is I think that they're deliberately purging and splitting the military with the aim of eroding it to the point that they can take power and that the military won't oppose them and will allow them to dismantle the democracy and to totally erode the Constitution to the point it's either just a piece of paper that nobody pays any attention to, or they even outright just take it out at some point. Because once they've established absolute power, all bets are off. they will do whatever they like with impunity, and good luck with anybody trying to stop that once they achieve that, which is, I think, what this is. I think the Venezuelan move is a key, major move on the democracy versus dictatorship chessboard. This is a significant move, and it changes the world stage too, and it also has significant bearings on the way the military is able to function. This forces many of the upper echelons of the military, the top brass. This is forcing the top brass into a terrible situation. So, impulsive and erratic leadership. Nobody knows what Donald Trump's going to do tomorrow. He might wake up and pick a country, any country you like, and say, let's bomb them. So I think, though, I don't know whether it's totally a feature and not a bug. I think it's half-half. I think it's half feature, half bug, which is, I do think Donald Trump's health is ailing. I do think that they prop him up with some sort of medication that helps him function. But I think we're seeing definite, decline. Physically, he is ailing. He's an old guy. And let's face it, even at any age, the presidency is a huge weight on your shoulders. Even if you're trying to treat it like you are the king, it's still a lot of work and requires a lot of attention. And I mean, this is why I think we're seeing Donald Trump falling asleep, etc. So no congressional checks, laws don't matter. So the transactional extortionist, so pay tribute in the face of, or face the consequences, like a mafia boss saying, pay me. Everything's got a price. And then here's the thing, loyalty means nothing. Loyalty means nothing. What I mean by this is loyalty to on an international stage. But this could be applied to almost anything. It's a one-way street with people like Trump. Narcissists are like that. It's a one-way street. It's transactional. Now, if you've got something they want and you do a deal, it's transactional. But if they can take something and not give you anything for it and they think they can get away with it, that's what they'll do. So all the allies that are out there, any relationships that existed prior to this Trump 2.0 regime, they are systematically dismantling the whole thing, like the whole diplomatic structure. If an ally is loyal, it means nothing unless there's something to be gained. In terms of the Trump administration, that's the attitude. The attitude is, pay us. Oh, okay, kick some money, we'll do something for you. It's transactional. It's not the loyalty that was there where there were alliances and there was trust. This erodes all of that. All of those countries that had a positive relationship with the US, that loyalty they see is a one-way street. And this has consequences. It's going to come back. Will it matter? If they have absolute power, probably not. But it changes the whole ethos of the whole free world. It's like a new dark age. Anyway, and highest bidder wins. I mean, it's pretty obvious what that means. That several players want to be involved, or, they want you to partner and contract to do something, or whatever it is, a policy position. It's no longer, the most important ally or the strategic benefit of the United States, what's best for the country, what's the honorable, the idea of what's the honorable thing to do, any kind of, even a scintilla of morality, it just isn't there. I mean, there is no morality. It's all transactional. So policy is up for sale from any source, anything. It's like everything has a price, and it's like an auction. Highest bidder wins. That's the way it's working. That's what I see anyway. And so, Venezuela wasn't just an invasion, and they call it a police action, or what was it, law enforcement. No, this was doing a lot of things at once, and this is one of the consequences, which is the whole trust and the whole international order has now been smashed. And I'm going to talk about my Humpty Dumpty slide next, which is all about that. All these countries, I mean, even Denmark is in the line of fire because Trump wants Greenland and has it in his mind that he wants to acquire it because it's a strategic imperative. If you went back even to Obama and beyond, back in time, can you imagine Obama doing this? Or can you imagine Clinton doing this? Could you imagine Jimmy Carter doing this? Could you imagine Reagan doing this? Could you imagine Eisenhower doing this? Could you imagine JFK doing this? Even Nixon, could you imagine him trying to do this? So just think about this. If Putin did this kind of thing, it'd be labelled aggression. And if China did this kind of thing, we'd probably call it expansionism. When America does it, it's law enforcement action. That's what Mark Rubio called it. And so, okay, have a look at this slide. Hopefully this is going to help you understand a lot of the moving parts of what's happening and why there's so many different angles and so many different points of view. What is Donald Trump really good at doing? Telling stories, waving a shiny object. I remember seeing Steve Bannon interviewed on this very subject, and he talks about flooding the zone, and he talks about high muzzle velocity, like a gun. The idea is that you pepper the media with a whole slew of different things, and you try and hide the things that you're trying to get through that you don't want people to know, and you're trying to make people focus on the things that will keep them busy. And the idea is to overwhelm people and exhaust them. That is the plan. High muzzle velocity, Steve Bannon's concept, flood the zone, do a whole lot of things at once so it keeps people on their back feet. It unbalances them. That's the key thing. That is what they're trying to do here. All right? And it's very clever. So there's the first thing is that wedge, where if you question them, they say, oh, you're supporting the terror, you're supporting the dictator. Okay? So let's look at this. I'll put this chart up just so you guys can see it, and I'll just talk through it. Number one, Epstein files deadline fell on January the 3rd. January 6th was approaching at that time. And then there is Trump's visible health decline. The economy's not in great shape with inflation continuing to drive forwards and affordability Trump has made a joke of. The fact is that thousands of people are finding it a challenge just to get groceries on the table. And let's face it, economically, because of the tariffs and because of the continued rate of inflation, thousands and thousands of people are finding it hard to keep a roof over their head, keep food on the table, pay their medical insurance bills, keep their utilities running. The utility prices have skyrocketed because you're seeing things like AI turning up where these huge data centers roll up, chewing up tremendous amounts of power, so people's electricity costs have gone up. I think everybody can take for granted a lot of people are really struggling. And there are lots of people that are working 2 or 3 or some even 4 jobs. And let's face it, there's all these new diseases coming out. There's even strains of the flu, there's measles, there's all sorts of things that should have been managed that aren't. And this distracts from that. Those reports are being buried under the sea of these other media stories. But it's there. Oh yeah, and Trump vetoing bills from the House that he didn't like because he's angry about that. When the Republicans actually hold both houses, there's actually a bipartisan set of bills that were getting through, and he didn't like that, so he vetoed them. Another story, but, they don't want that to show. And then there's the Affordable Care Act. The premiums are rising dramatically. And why is that? Because in the one big beautiful bill, the Republicans passed that cut $1.2 trillion from healthcare. And one of the victims of that cutting, while they gave, wait for this, $4.5 trillion to the billionaires, you could call that $4,500 billion, and yet to maintain the subsidies that would have meant that people aren't paying double, treble, or even quadruple their health insurance premiums. What was it? It was something like 30 billion, I think, per annum. They could give Argentina 40 billion. They had 4,500 billion that they gave in tax cuts to mainly the billionaires. But the point is that people are now realizing that they can't afford the healthcare, or they're going to have to sacrifice and maybe not eat for days. Maybe they don't pay their electricity bill and go without electricity in the middle of winter, right? And then there are the internal divisions within the Republican ranks and MAGA. So this overshadows that. And what happens when something like a war happens? Everybody's supposed to come together behind the president and behind the troops, right? So it's very clever. It rallies those people that feel obliged to do that, support the troops. And then this also overshadows things like the court's ruling that Trump had to pull out the National Guard out of several cities because the judges ruled he had to do that. Now, they're probably going to appeal it, but for now, it means that the pressure's off some of the major cities. Unfortunately, not DC. Washington, DC remains under the heel of Donald Trump for the moment, but they don't like showing that they lost something. So that was also another piece of the news that's been displaced. You see this? And then the icing on the cake, or the cherry, I don't know, whichever you prefer, is what ICE has been doing. Brutalizing people, stomping on brown people's heads, dragging people away, totally disregarding the Fourth and Fifth and First Amendments, acting like a paramilitary, like a lawless band of thugs, usually not identifying themselves, and then actually bashing down people's doors without a warrant and without any intelligence, and going into citizens' homes, destroying and wrecking their homes, plundering all their valuables and money, zip-tying young children who were naked and asleep at something like 1 a.m. and throwing them in some disgusting kind of truck. And of course, there's understandably moral outrage about such things going on. So, does that help? So we've got the wedge trap, and now we've got the deflections. Okay, so let's briefly dig into the Epstein files and what's happening there, because this was another thing that they were obfuscating. I think a lot of people have covered this, so I'm just going to briefly touch on it, just so that anybody that's watching this that is wanting to get a briefing covering everything, that's what I'm doing. So please skip ahead if you know all about the Epstein files and what's going on there. I'm going to cover it briefly. So January the 3rd was the deadline for the Department of Justice to fully release all of the Epstein files, and they failed to do that. There are large redactions that are still there and still remain. And so the Department of Justice removed 16 files, and there was a claim made that one was a photo of Donald Trump with Jeffrey Epstein. And there are still millions of files that haven't been released, and they were required to do so. And so the bipartisan effort in the Congress has been stonewalled. And so with all these things going on, some of the Democrats responded saying it was just a coincidence that the Venezuela operation happened just by sheer chance on January the 3rd, right? They wouldn't deliberately try and distract from the Epstein files, would they? So, it's like the standard line, which is, oh, of course, they would never, ever, ever distract from the Epstein files, now would they? I mean, it does look pretty suspicious, don't you think, that the deadline for the Epstein files was January the 3rd, and that passed. And millions of files still outstanding. Okay, so let's look at this slide. Let me tell you a little bit of a story behind what was in my mind and how I got there. So when I was looking at the whole Venezuela operation and looking at all the repercussions and the implications of what was going on, in the back of my mind I was thinking, there's some real patterns here. And I reflected on Germany. I'm one of these people that had an avid interest in history. and politics and a number of other things. When I was a kid, I was really interested in World War II and what happened and why. And as I got older, I read deeper and learnt more and built up a working knowledge of many aspects of that period. And I mean, it's just staggering how much happened then. And the great thing is that we have a lot of good history that we can draw on, although, as you can imagine, events like that are so complicated, you're only getting the filter of those that were able to record things and put their spin on it. But still, it gives you a flavour for what's happening, right? And so I was thinking about what happened in Germany, and, after 1933, it becomes basically a dictatorship. And the thing that came to my mind was what was called the Anschluss, which was Austria was essentially annexed and made part of Germany. And their argument was, well, our cultures are the same, we should be one big, happy German family. And there was a kind of a coup that happened there called the Anschluss, where Austria basically was annexed and became part of Germany in that period. And so I was thinking the Anschluss model, and Czechoslovakia was one of the other places that they annexed, etc. And the thing that occurred to me, though, was, maybe this Venezuela thing is a little bit like that. But I was like, but it's not really like a full-on invasion, and I was thinking, but this is a pretty big deal. The more I looked at what was happening with the Venezuela situation, the wheels started turning. Actually, it's interesting. V from, was it Below the Desk, actually mentioned Poland, and I was like, because I put my paper together and it hit me like a train when I was thinking, great minds think alike, I suppose. But I was like, it suddenly dawned on me. I was like, oh no, it's not the Anschluss. This is Poland, 1939. Now, is it exactly the same? No. Are there alliances that can stand against, the United States like Britain and France could at that time? No, it's a very, very different scenario. And if we're looking at China's probably about China and Russia from a nuclear weapons standpoint are probably the biggest players. But Poland was, it concocted, they've basically made a mock invasion from the Polish invading Germany to be the pretext to go in and invade them, which, just the gall to do that, and as if nobody could tell what was happening. But they would stage these things to then give the narrative, we're being attacked by the Poles. Like, why? Little old Poland, who with their lances, the guys riding horses with a pike. They weren't completely like that, but this was a transitional period and Germany had modernized. But anyway, I was thinking, but there is a parallel, which is World War II started when Germany finally crossed the line after there was the Neville Chamberlain peace in our time sort of agreement. And France and Britain thought, this is too far. Germany's just getting too big, and this is just over the line. It's not acceptable, and declared war. This is not a declaration of war like that. At this point, we don't have troops going in there. And here's the thing, why the parallel works. We've got to get out of this mindset that when we see one pattern, it has to be identical, or the correlation needs to be a lot more exact than it actually needs to be. What am I saying? This is a technical age with AI, with technologies and things like that, and with the ability to deliver things like nuclear weapons. Didn't exist in 1939. Oh no. And it would have been it would have played out very differently if they did exist. What you've got to understand from this is that this is a shock to the international order of things. It's like a tectonic shift. In America, everybody's looking at things from America's point of view, which is very insular and looks inward. And what you have to do to understand this from a global perspective, from an international standpoint, is everybody that's not in America, everybody outside of America now is directly threatened by the United States. What it's about is a major power attacking a much smaller nation. Now, you can dress this up all you like about being a police operation, but what's important here is, what does the rest of the world think about this, really, deep down in quiet corridors? Because your allies aren't going to tell you outright, well, what are you doing? And they're probably not going to come out directly against you too hard. There will be messages sent. There will be subtle ways to convey their sentiments. Trump and the elites that support him have fundamentally changed the world forever. They have broken a system that has been in place since the end of 1945. They have destroyed and dismantled all sorts of systems through the United States, making a mockery of the Constitution, making a mockery of the rule of law, making a mockery of democracy itself and freedom of speech and due process. And the amount of corruption that's going on is incredible. Just wholesale plundering. And so the Venezuela operation is just another data point along the road to where they want to go, which is a dictatorship. Venezuela, January the 3rd, it's not really Venezuela that matters, it's what was done. So if you go into my channel details, you'll see that there's a Substack link there, and I'm going to be posting documents and additional information there. Free for you guys. This one is free. So please subscribe, though, if you can subscribe to Substack, and subscribe here. I've called it the Dunro Doctrine. Is this the 1939 Poland moment? I think the repercussions of what happened on January the 3rd will be, at a scale, something like Germany invading Poland. But I really do think it's that far-reaching, recognizing just what an impact the January 3rd invasion of Venezuela actually was.